The haunting of St. Haven's Hospital. Haven's Hospital had always stood tall and imposing, a grim relic of an era long past. Its towering facade loomed over the city, casting long shadows that stretched across the neighboring buildings. Within its walls, secrets festered and despair lingered in the very air, for it was known as the Hospital of No Return. People who entered with terminal conditions often never left, as if the building itself had a thirst for suffering. The most terrifying stories came from the patients who lingered on the brink of death, whispering about a ghostly presence that stalked the corridors, waiting to prey on their souls. This ghost was no ordinary specter. It was a malevolent force, fueled by an unholy bargain and the agony of a life cut short. Her name, while human, was now long forgotten. In her life, she was a mother named Elisa Martinez, a woman whose story had become a chilling legend within the hospital's grim history. Decades ago, Elisa had been just another patient in the hospital. She had been diagnosed with a terminal illness, one that gnawed away at her from the inside, leaving her weak and frail. A mother of 2 young children, Elisa had pleaded for her life. She prayed to God with fervor, crying out night after night as her condition worsened. "Please don't let me leave them alone," she would whisper in the dark, her thin hands clasped in a desperate prayer. But her prayers seemed to fall on deaf ears. Days turned into weeks, and her health only declined. The hospital's sterile white walls became a prison, a place where hope went to die. She could see the pity in the nurses' eyes, the resignation in the doctor's expressions whenever they checked her vitals. The prognosis was always the same. There was nothing more they could do. Elisa felt the icy grip of death closing around her, but the thought of leaving her children to fend for themselves was unbearable. The hospital's chapel became her refuge, a place where she cried until her voice grew hoarse, pleading for a miracle that never came. In her desperation, Elisa turned to darker forces. One night, in the shadows of her hospital room, she made a pact with something not of this world. She was visited by a demon, a wretched creature that slithered through the cracks of reality into her dying sanctuary. It did not speak in words, but in whispers that clawed at the edges of her sanity. It offered her a chance, not to save herself, but to ensure her children would be provided for once she was gone. All it asked in return was a promise. She would take souls for it, those teetering on the brink of death in exchange for their suffering. Driven mad by her fear and love for her children, Elisa agreed. She sold what remained of her soul, binding herself to the demon's will. She would haunt the hospital as a ghost, preying upon the dying, delivering their souls to the demon in exchange for her children's future. The following morning, Elisa was found dead in her bed, her face twisted into a grim, fearful smile. The nurses who discovered her spoke of an unnatural chill in the room, as if the air itself recoiled from the scene. Elisa's death was just another statistic, another patient lost to the illness, but the nurses whispered to one another about a darkness that had taken root in the hospital. Soon after Elisa's passing, strange things began to happen at St. Haven's. Patients who were terminally ill started to speak of a ghostly figure, a pale woman with hollow eyes and long, unkempt hair. She appeared in the dead of night, standing silently at the foot of their beds, watching them with a gaze that pierced the soul. Those who saw her said they felt a terrible coldness settle over them, a suffocating darkness that made it hard to breathe. Her presence filled them with a paralyzing dread, as if she were reaching into their very essence, seeking to claim something that was not hers to take. The hospital staff tried to dismiss these sightings as hallucinations, the product of fevered minds on the brink of death. But soon, the stories grew more disturbing. Patients who had been stable would suddenly take a turn for the worse after encountering the ghost. They would writhe in their beds, screaming of a hand clutching their hearts, squeezing out the last vestiges of life. Then, as if on cue, they would grow still, their faces frozen in expressions of abject terror. The legend of Elisa, the soul-stealing ghost, spread like wildfire among the hospital staff. Nurses refused to work the night shifts alone. and doctors would hastily cross themselves before entering rooms where patients were said to be nearing death. Some even claimed to have heard faint whispers in the hallways, whispers that spoke of bargains and lost souls, echoing in the otherwise silent corridors. One evening, a young nurse named Maria was assigned to the hospice wing, the section of the hospital where patients came to spend their final days. She had heard the rumors but dismissed them as superstitions, ghost stories told to keep people on edge. However, her skepticism was shattered when she encountered Elisa. It was past midnight and the hospital was eerily quiet. Maria was making her rounds, checking on the patients when she noticed one room where the lights flickered uncontrollably. She stepped inside to find an elderly man, his face drenched in sweat, his eyes wide with terror. "She's here," he rasped, pointing to the corner of the room. Maria turned, and for a heartbeat, everything grew impossibly cold. In the dim light, she saw a figure standing there, a woman with hollow eyes and skin as pale as death. The apparition stared at Maria, unblinking, and for a moment, Maria felt as if she were falling into an abyss, being pulled into an infinite darkness. The room spun and she gasped, stumbling back. The ghost took a step forward, her movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring every inch of ground she covered. The elderly man began to convulse, gasping for air, his eyes rolling back into his head. Maria screamed, rushing to his side, but it was too late. The man let out a final choking breath, his body going limp. The ghost stood silently, watching before slowly fading into the shadows, leaving behind a suffocating emptiness. Maria fled the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She reported what she had seen, but no one believed her. They called it the stress of the job, the hallucinations of a mind pushed to its limits. But Maria knew what she had witnessed. Elisa's ghost was real, and she was still fulfilling her end of the pact. Days passed, and more patients succumbed under mysterious circumstances. The pattern was always the same. They would speak of the ghostly figure, feel an overwhelming sense of dread, and then die in agony, their faces twisted in fear. It was as if the ghost fed on their suffering, growing stronger with each soul she claimed. In the years that followed, St. Haven's Hospital became a place of dread. People came to fear it not for the illnesses it housed, but for the malevolent spirit that stalked its halls. The story of Elisa, the mother who made a pact with a demon to save her children, became a cautionary tale. It was said that she had been granted her wish. Her children grew up healthy and prosperous, never wanting for anything. But the price had been her soul, bound to the hospital for eternity, cursed to steal the souls of the dying. Even now, the legend persists. It is said that if you find yourself in St. Haven's Hospital lying on the cusp of death, you might feel a sudden, bone-chilling cold. You might hear faint whispers in the dark, feel a presence looming over you as you teeter on the edge. And if you see her, if you see the ghostly figure of a woman with hollow eyes standing at the foot of your bed, you know your time is up. For she comes not to comfort, but to take. She is Elisa, the soul stealer, the ghost who preys on the dying, fulfilling a dark pact that will never be broken. So if you ever find yourself in that hospital, clinging to life, pray that she does not find you. Pray that you do not see her standing there, waiting in the shadows. Because once she sets her eyes on you, there is no escape. You will become another soul in her endless collection, a victim of a mother's desperate bargain with the darkness. And the hospital will continue to feed, as it always has, on the despair and fear of those who are unfortunate enough to cross paths with the ghost of Elisa Martinez.